12,000 years ago, Europe looked very different. It was the late stages of the last glacial maximum. What is now the North Sea was once a vast landscape of rivers, hills, and forests. Here, Ice Age megafauna and Stone Age hunter-gatherers made a living for thousands of years. But as temperatures rose, so did sea levels. By 6200 BCE, what remained was something resembling the Europe we know today, but with a notable island remnant. Here, the first inhabitants of Europe still lived out their lives for generations. The final nail in the coffin for this ancient landmass likely came in the form of a series of colossal underwater landslides known as the Storegga slides off the coast of Norway. Walls of water tore across the North Sea, drowning coastlines and eroding what remained of the ancient land to a point where it couldn't recover. The landmass has come to be known as Doggerland, named after the Dogger Bank, the shallow underwater plateau that remains today. But what if Doggerland survived? For the entire landmass to remain above sea level, we'd realistically need the last glacial maximum, colloquially referred to as the Ice Age, to continue, which is a tad beyond the scope of what I imagined for this video. But Dogger Island? That's a different story. Say instead of 3 sudden massive submarine landslides, the geological instability on the Norwegian continental shelf resolves itself more gradually through smaller incremental slumps over centuries, without that cataclysmic tsunami. And if we also raise the crust of the North Sea by just a couple of meters, say through slightly more isostatic rebound as the glaciers melted, we could theoretically end up with a major island in the North Sea, a proper remnant of Doggerland that could alter the history of the region quite significantly. The early demographic history of Doggerland would closely resemble that of Britain. The original hunter-gatherer populations of Western Europe would still settle the region, just as in real life. When Dogger Island doesn't sink, they continue to live there, just as they did in Britain. Then around 6000 BCE, Neolithic farmers make their way into Europe from the Middle East, intermixing with the locals and introducing agriculture. 3,000 years later, Indo-European pastoralists migrate from the steppe into Europe, once again not replacing, but intermixing with the locals. Dogger Island becomes a part of the larger Bell-Beaker culture, and then as we near written history, we can more confidently say that the island would be Celtic, home to peoples similar to those of Britain. As the Roman Empire conquers Britain, Doggerland's role resembles that of Ireland, never conquered by Rome, but influenced by it through trade. As Roman control of Britain wanes and the Great Migration period begins, Dogger Island once again faces demographic shifts. The Jutes, Angles, and Saxons don't just make their way to Britain, they also arrive on Dogger Island. Most Angles and Saxons still head for Britain, but Dogger Island, lying just off the coast of Juteland, or Juteland as it's known in Danish, becomes the primary destination for the Jutes, who settle here almost exclusively. The island Jutes are allowed to maintain their language and develop a culture notably different from that in the peninsula, where they're entirely assimilated and become Danes. The Jutes, at least back then, weren't North Germanic like the Scandinavians, but West Germanic, cousins of the English and Frisians. By the Middle Ages, their language develops into something in between Old Norse and Old English, as they become a bridge between the two cultures, way before the Viking Age. From a world-building point of view, the naming of Dogger Island brings up an interesting conundrum. The island is very likely to be named after the Jutes, yet in real life the peninsula in Denmark is. In this alternate world, I imagine Peninsula Jutland just isn't named after the Jutes at all. As the Danes settled the peninsula, the name Juteland or Jutland becomes associated specifically with the island, the true land of the Jutes. So another name for the peninsula takes root, Himmerland in Danish, and likely Cimbria in English. Both names trace back to the ancient Cimbri tribe who once inhabited the region. In real life, Cimbria was the Latin name for the peninsula commonly used throughout Europe prior to the 18th century. The Himma part of Himmerland, meanwhile, evolved from the same root, the Cimbri, just in Danish. In real life, it became the name of a smaller region, but in this scenario, it expands to mean the entire peninsula. Before moving on, consider checking out the new revamped membership perks like early access to videos and mentions at the end of videos. This is a small channel, so any support is much appreciated. With Juteland lying in between Britain and Scandinavia, both culturally and geographically, its development would likely fall somewhere in between as well. Its first proper kingdom emerges around the 700s, later than Mercia, Wessex, and Northumbria, but earlier than Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. This would be right in time for the Viking Age, which still begins around the same time period, as the same pressures remain. New Norse shipbuilding technology, a lack of farmland in places like Norway, and political instability from unification wars and local rulers consolidating power push many to try their luck raiding. Here, Juteland plays a significant role in Scandinavian politics, much earlier than England. As Shetland and the Orkney Islands are colonized by Norway, Juteland is conquered and settled by Danish petty kings and lords. And half a century later, it's used as a launching-off point for the invasions of England and establishment of the Danelaw. Because of this, the Norse leave a much more lasting impact, as Britain is more accessible from Juteland. The Danelaw lasts longer, the remnant around Jorvik becomes entrenched. With both Jorvik and Juteland under Danish rule, the power balance between Denmark and England has changed significantly. Danish kings can actually maintain a long-term foothold in the north of England. This shakes up medieval English history noticeably. There is still a Danish king of England under the North Sea Empire. When Sven Forkbeard dies, both Norwegian and Danish successors still make a play for the English throne, and the Normans still invade and conquer England. But once the dust settles, the Normans are faced with ruling a very different, less culturally homogeneous England. Northumbrians in this world are not English, they are their own distinct culture and people, descended mostly from Scandinavian settlers. Throughout the Middle Ages, they integrate with the broader English sphere, but keep a regional identity, just like the Welsh. Juteland, meanwhile, remains with the Scandinavian sphere. Though the Jutes were originally closer to the English and Frisians, they become another Scandinavian culture and kingdom. It joins the Kalmar Union, and remains in a union with Denmark and Norway once Sweden fights for its independence. This North Sea kingdom doesn't become a superpower, but it is more relevant than real-life Denmark-Norway. This means Sweden still rises, but in a more limited capacity as their rival to the west is stronger. But the North Sea kingdom doesn't alter the overall trends of European history going forward. Scandinavia plays a similar role. The impact is more regional, as the power dynamics in Northern Europe are shifted. The North Sea kingdom would eventually come to an end, likely a result of being on the losing side of the Napoleonic Wars, just as Denmark-Norway in real life. From then on, now independent Juteland plays a fairly minor role, with a long history of neutrality much like Switzerland, Sweden and Ireland, which would take shape during the naval build-up and competition between Britain and the rising Germany, as both empires eyed the island due to its strategic location. By the modern day, Juteland is a small, highly developed country. It would most resemble Denmark, linguistically and culturally, but with a notable English or even Dutch-like flavor to it. Situated right in the middle of the North Sea, both Juteland itself and its waters would be home to significant oil and gas reserves. These would likely fund massive land reclamation projects beyond that of even the Dutch, as Juteland has quite a high population but very little land. Britain is quite different as well, as there is another constituent country within the United Kingdom, namely Northumbria. Its status is much like that of Scotland and Wales, culturally distinct but also similar through being British and heavily influenced by England. With time, most of its population would adopt the English language, with only a small remnant of Danic speakers, Danic being a North Germanic or Scandinavian language descended from the Danish settlers with some Celtic influences. Because of the North Sea Kingdom, Denmark, Sweden and Norway also have noticeably different borders than in real life. But that's about all for now. A big thank you to members Polanska, Pac-Man and Willie Kins for supporting the channel. And if you also want to be mentioned at the end of videos or get other membership perks like early access to videos, consider joining. This is a small channel, so any support is much appreciated. Also, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this in the future. See you next time.